thank you for having us here at the PAS collection. These two, I've actually not been around these two. I've been around your car.
Right, my car at my shop. We have another car at my location in Richmond, and it's an 88 car.
Yep.
Right.
Yep. And these, this is an 87-20.
Correct.
Championship car.
One of the cars that won the championship for Saleen in 1987. Correct.
This is an 89 car.
Correct. They built 2 cars in 89. This car at the last race, by winning, allotted all the points to go to the other cars so they could win the manufacturers, the tire, the team, and the driver's championship.
Yeah, that's right, because there were multiple championships.
Multiple championships.
Underneath that, yeah.
Correct. This was what they call the girls' car. So the ladies drove this car, and which was number 20, and then back at PAS home base in Richmond, I have the 88 girls' car, number 20. And my buddies always tease me about having the girls' car, but
hey, Desiree.
Yeah, Desiree Wilson and Lisa Caceres were the 2 main drivers,
yeah.
And then there were several other ladies that drove too.
Because I just a funny story about Kenny Brown and Desiree and setting up Steve's car, and Kenny set up Desiree's car. Steve set up his own car. Desiree was faster. Steve came back and said, "Set my car up like Desiree's."
Well, people don't realize they had each car had its own group of techs. And they would set it up depending on how they liked it. So
yep.
They would change springs at the races, and some of the people liked the cars to turn in differently than others, different tire pressures and all those things. And sometimes some of the cars were faster than other ones.
It was something that in my conversation with Kenny Brown, he said that when you had multiple drivers, the challenge was getting the drivers to understand that they all needed to meet on a common ground. Because some drivers would want more aggressive settings than other drivers, so they had to realize where's going to be fastest for all of them.
Correct.
Well,
some like oversteer, some like understeer, and some of the drivers steer with the throttle.
Yep.
Other ones wanted to slide the car around differently. So you had to find that happy medium. That when they did a driver's change and the next driver got in, they didn't go, "Oh, you're giving me a piece of junk now. It's all worn out." Well, the reality is it just handles differently than what you're used to.
Yeah, or the preference that they had,
These were called showroom stock.
Right.
Okay. And the idea was you took a stock production car, you put a roll cage in it, and you went racing. Now, we all know from racing that's not always the case. Once these cars won the championship, Kenny and Steve were asked not to bring these cars back again. Okay. Later, we found out all the different tricks and stuff they did. The K-frames were modified in these cars for anti-dive. The bushings were made of different material. The wheels offsets were a little bit different. There was lots of little tricks in order to win.
I think what my statement was is that I was going towards the differences, moving towards the 88, 89. Like this would be a stock catback, not necessarily Dynamax.
Correct.
Like these cars. So there were some differences. I guess I was going on that. But yeah, I do know that the K-frame was specifically cut, the holes, by Kenny Brown for these cars.
Correct.
They were blank.
And you would think that we were worried they were going to get caught doing something else and that would be it. Well, no. This was the final that they did. And these cars are really trick.
Yeah.
They have JFZ front brakes. And because you have to remember, what was the weakest part of what the Mustang had was the brakes.
Yeah, if you look at just about any pictures from wrecks back in the 90s or late 80s, it's always the front ends just plowed off because they don't stop.
Well, they stop, but they only stop for a little while. And the whole problem was that the Chevy guys had the Corvette brakes they adapted to the cars. So the Morrison guys were running Corvette brakes. And they petitioned SCCA to say, hey, we need to have something that's somewhat on par. And from what I was told was, if it was offered in the Ford Motorsport catalog, then they'd allow them to put them on. So they were in the catalog. Whether you could order them or not, I don't know.
Right.
And these are stamped with like a hand-stamped Ford part number. But that's not the trickiest part. The trickiest part about this car is that the doors and the body are widened. And unless you know what you're looking at, because these cars were in my shop, all of them for a couple of years, excuse me for walking in front, but if you actually look at the inner parts of the door and you run a tape on this door, the door and the rear of the car is actually wider to let the air go across the rear tires. But unless you know what you're looking at, and also the way that it's painted, it's sort of like when the manufacturers do the crazy camo colors and you can't see it. But when you have the cars parked side by side, you're like, huh. The fenders are also different too, and they're moved out. If you notice, see the angle right here? The fenders are pulled out.
Yeah, and it usually pushes the nose down because it pulls the front back. The transition here is pretty interesting to see because like this wheel is way deeper in the offset up front, and then you put the JFC brake car and you can see it looks like they're almost just like a square setup.
Well, what they did in order to make it a little bit easier, they added the offset into the front brake system.
Yep.
So they pushed it out so that way they could run the same wheels and tires front to rear. Now what they would do on certain tracks, because they really weren't supposed to change the gearing, they would run a taller tire in the rear or a shorter tire in the rear depending on the track, because they'd run a 255, which is the Corvette size, in the rear in order to get a little bit more gear. We've sort of found the 245/45 tire all the way around on all of the cars tends to work the best. And we drive these cars. These are not cars that sit for a long period of time.
Now you had these at a recent R-Car event three
years ago in Ohio,
yeah.
But that car I used to take to the Shelby events, and I don't even know how many laps I put on it at several events until the tires were just done.
And there's a lot of mystique about the race cars, and people are like, "Oh no, you're taking them." But you know what, guys? The front ends and the damage that these cars got in their racing series, a lot of these are not the exact original panel that came on this car the first race it entered.
No. It was like Rock'em Sock'em Robots, and they had a tendency to bang them up a little bit.
Yeah.
And that rubbing his racing scenario definitely was in effect in showroom stock. But no, we drive these cars. And we'll go to an event and take them and have some fun with them, because it is the few cars that are in the collection that if God forbid something happened to it, it could be fixed and it's not going to affect the value of the car.
Right, yeah. And the cool thing about having these together, although Mark's car is at his shop, we are going to include footage of it to show you the differences in transition, because this one really it still has the stock Ford front brakes, and that's pretty easy to spot. But the JFZ brakes, it's front and rear on this car.
It makes a big difference.
It does. And it's
I'm
wider.
usually pretty good for the first couple of laps when I was out with the guys, but once the brakes got a little bit hotter, these cars were outstopping me tremendously.
And that's really, it's all about braking. It's being able to go deep.
These
right?
cars, the early cars, you needed to slide around a little bit in order to be able to get them to slow down. These cars would slow down on themselves. The only problem they had was it's a modified Fox spindle. And as they got hot, when you stepped on the brakes, it would cause the brake pads to close up a little bit. And when you turned real sharp, the spindle would actually flex. Oh. And they had problems with the brakes after long periods of time.
Well, these are very early 4-piston calipers. Nowadays, people are so used to going to Willwood or Bear and, hey, click a box, and then they ship you a...
Oh, right.
But this was very trick. I mean, you didn't see this on a street car in the 80s.
No.
The Corvette even just had a 2-piston caliper at the time.
Correct.
So, and that was an upgrade.
Correct.
So this is very trick stuff for its day. You don't see it very often in that time on the street unless it was somebody buying the JFC
People
stuff.
also ask about, how much power does it make? What's this, what's that? And there was a gentleman by the name of Dave Dixon, and Dave was an ex-Formula One engineer. And Dave did the motors for these cars. And what's really cool is each part has an SA number on it, from the intake plate to everything. So they would take the motors apart after the race, rebuild the motors, put them back in the car. Now, not every car got the same motor every time.
Now that's 88, 89. Wasn't more of this like Kenny Brown?
Kenny Brown's guys did. I want to say there was an
87.
engine shop in Omaha that did the motors for these cars.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that's Kenny Brown was heavily involved with those, and of course his parting ways through the 87 season into 88. That's when I think Dave Dixon
and Dave took over. And both this car and the 88 we have back at the Performance Autosport home base has the original Dixon motor in it. Wow. And they're right at 300 horsepower, and they look completely stock.
That's speed density.
Yes.
You know, I'd heard stories about them testing computers over and over and over and over and finding the most aggressive one that fit the motor to get the most power. And it's still untouched.
It's just the right pieces.
Computer. Yep, it's all about having that. You know, I heard a story, Kenny Brown, and they literally had a box full of not roller rockers, stamped Ford rockers, and they put a mic on every one, and they were throwing away the short ones and putting the long ones in another box. So if it measured longer, it would give you more lift at the valve.
Right.
So that was a competitive edge that you could have, but you'd sit for hours and go through 200 or 300 of them just to get 16 or 48 of them for the motors, you know. But
they did what they had to do to win.
Yeah, exactly, which worked. So
definitely, and they're fun to drive. I mean, it's a hoot to get them out on the track and enjoy them. And you know, cars like this really need to be driven and need to get out for people to see. Absolutely,
I think that's a part of what is really going to bring value to any brand, but Saleens. And you see these on the truck. What's that? And then the interest in the street cars goes up I would say exponentially when you see something like this, because it really is a racing heritage.
Sure. Well, people also, how many of these cars did they make, and how rare are they? And you know, they made about 8 of these cars, and there was a one backup car that we know of, but was pretty neat. I mean, it's pretty rare compared to the 26 Shelby R models.
Yeah. Yeah.
So they're really unique and rare cars, and we're very fortunate to have 3 of them in the PAS collection.
Yeah, and then of course you could also check out the video of the Beast, which is the 93 SA10 R car.
We like race cars if you haven't noticed that.
Yeah, it's fun. They're cool cars. Then, like you said, you can take them and move them around and drive them. And
well, this is the car you can put your hand on, you can lean on, you can put your lunch on, and it's not a big deal compared to some of the other cars, and you sort of, you don't want to hardly touch them because you don't want to scratch the original finish.
So the other differences people may not recognize, because the paint scheme is the same, but the decal sets change through the years as well. To make the cars look, you could tell the difference in the years. Right.
And the sponsorship with Montgomery Ward and some of the other groups, they actually built new cars every year. So some of the teams recycled the cars every year and just put new stickers on them. Saleen didn't do that. So the identification here where it says Montgomery Ward Auto Express is obviously different than it is on that car, and it's different on the 88. And that's the easiest way to tell the difference. Plus, the 88s and 89s ran the 5-spoke wheels, and the 87s typically ran the baskets. Now, when I run that car on the track, I've got a set of 5-spokes I run on it because the brakes run cooler, obviously, with a 5-spoke wheel. Yeah. The other big difference is the roll cages in these. This roll cage comes down and goes through the dash, and there's a hidden bar that goes behind the dash that they weren't supposed to have, but it's back there.
Yeah.
Versus that cage was a cage that was done by the guys in Omaha, and it actually goes in front of the dash, and the gauges are sitting on a pillar in there, which is really a neat looking
that
setup.
Is cool. I noticed that earlier looking at it before while we're setting up cameras. It's really cool to see how this one's bolted to the dash. So. But there's differences in the cars you can actually tell. It's just kind of cool being able to, if you see a picture, like, oh, that's an 89 or oh, that's an 88. But this is really the only championship year for Saleen, correct? Right?
Correct. Now, some of the other cars won races, but they didn't win the championship. The competition got a little bit stiffer, and it wasn't as easy. And but yes, 87 is really what everybody refers to as the championship.
I think you know that too. You've had American Iron underneath your wings in your shop. As time goes on, things get more expensive and get more competitive.
A lot of money racing cars.
Yes. Yeah. So it's one of those, as a racing season starts, it's usually grassroots, and then it grows into something really big, especially if a lot of people compete in it.
Definitely.
So, but these are really cool.
Thanks. Yeah, they're neat. They're probably, of all the cars in the PAS collection, that's probably the cars that I enjoy the most and I get the most use out of.
Yeah. Yeah, I would say, I would agree with you there. This is fun to be able to hop in and just go and not worry about too much.
Oh yeah, my business partner runs this car at VIR quite often, and it's not the fastest car on the track, but it's one of the most fun cars to drive.
Yeah, that's what's cool. These are visceral. I guess the newer cars, you have to be doing 200 miles an hour to feel like you're going fast. So
yeah, these cars, you don't have to be going but so fast, and you can definitely get the pucker effect as you're driving it, because you definitely have a lot of it definitely allows you to feel the track.
Well, as you said earlier, you slide through the turns on some of them, you know.
Oh yeah.
You have to make it go fast. But thanks, Mark, for letting us be a
Yep,
part of
no problem,
this.
Bob. Thank you very much.
And appreciate you.
Yep, and we'll get to the Richmond location and get the 88 car featured too.
Absolutely,
Yep.
yeah, absolutely. We'll include that one.
Well, Purist fans, you're stuck with me today, no Bob, because we're in the Richmond, Virginia location. This is 88 Saleen 20R. It was a factory team race car like the other two that we had in the warehouse down in North Carolina. These cars are super unique. The biggest way to tell the difference is that the sponsors changed right here on the fenders. It was the same sponsor, but they changed the font. And in the individual races, you could also change sponsorship too. So some of the cars will have different stickers at different times. But this car has always been a race car. It was never a street car. And that's what's really neat about the factory R model cars. Is Saleen bought a brand new car off the showroom floor and converted it into a race car. I've got a lot of track miles on this car. It's been a few years since I've had it on the track because life has changed and things are a little bit busier. But it is a lot of fun to drive. Kind of the unique features on these cars are the offset front wheels. Saleen did a little bit of interpretation of the rules. So these cars ran an 8-inch wheel front and rear, and they moved the offset of the wheels out because, as you know, the Saleen Mustang has a rear disc brake system. Well, the rear disc brake system widens the rear of the car, so it causes the car to push more. If the front's narrower, the rear's wider, it'll cause the car to push. So Saleen decided to move the front out and interpretate the rules or cheat. And these fenders are also moved out too, so it doesn't look like the front end of the car is wider. There are some pretty cool things that they did. These cars had a complete roll cage. The motors were balanced and blueprinted. This car makes like 260 at the rear tire, which is about 300 horsepower. Looks totally stock under the hood. Just a lot of fun to drive, a neat part of Saleen history. They actually, someone asked me on another video a while back if they had subframe connectors. They actually have what's called a jacking rail, and you can put the jack underneath the car at different spots when you do a quick pit change, and SCCA made them notch it in certain spots so it wouldn't be considered to be a frame connector, but it definitely works. The other cool thing about these cars is you notice they've got holes up here, and those are actually for driving lights, and they drove these cars in 24-hour races, and they would need night vision. And it was really, really cool. The other unique thing about this car, obviously, is the roll cage. And it's not super easy to get in and out of, but it's not real hard. The tubing back then was a little bit smaller, and it goes all the way up through, attaches behind the dash. The bar goes up, and there's actually a little cheater bar that goes behind the dash that wasn't supposed to be there, but in looking at this car up and down, I managed to find it. They ran a racing seat in the car. They were allowed to do that, but SCCA rules said you had to have the same interior in the car. So there's a factory Saleen flow fit, and then the rear seat is a factory LX seat. When they ran the cars, it would have had the seat tops on them, but they took the metal brackets out and just bungee corded them down. I don't have them in the car because they have a tendency to move around. The other thing that Saleen did was they actually had a gauge pod mounted that would show the oil pressure, the oil temperature, and the water temperature, which is pretty cool. The tachometer was the factory tach. It's fairly accurate. All the other gauges work except the speedometer. The speedometer is obviously unhooked because you don't have to worry about how fast you're going. These cars were base cars with no air conditioning. This car doesn't even have a rear defroster and roll-up windows. So that was the configuration of the driver's compartment of the R cars.
Mark, thanks so much for having us here at the bunker, as you call it. Really appreciate you letting us be a part of this. How can people find you?
Probably the easiest is through Facebook. I do monitor that a little bit quicker than the website. We also have a website at performanceautosport.com, but feel free to reach out. Try to return messages as quickly as possible, but as you can imagine, after doing these videos, we're getting a few.
Yeah,
definitely. But we're happy to help if you need any help with consultation with a collection you have. 1 or 2 cars you have, help with an insurance company, we're there. We also offer appraisals, and we're always looking to buy cars. So if you have anything that's for sale that you think might be looking good on one of these racks in here, feel free to reach out.
Thanks so much for having us here, man. Reach out to Mark. Be sure to go to puristmotorsports.com. There's some content there. We're trying to get a lot more there. That's why we're working with Mark. We want to bring information to you all on stories. There's a couple of stories of cars that have been rescued. One particular is a Saleen. The other one is a full-on, dead-on, accurate clone. You got to check it out. So go to puristmotorsports.com and make sure you subscribe.
Also, if you want us to come out and look at your collection or help, reach out to Bob, because we're more than happy to come out and feature your collection or your group of cars.
Yeah, it'd be fun. That would be a great time. Thanks, Mark. As always, whether you're driving them or restoring them, always enjoy them. Peace.